I'm delighted to invite to the stage Robin Denholm, who joined Telstra over the summer as our Chief Operations Officer. So, Robin, I'd just like to talk a little bit about sort of some of those experiences or how bits of diversity have influenced your career.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me here today. I have a fundamental, and it's evolved over the years, but a fundamental belief that if you put different people with different experiences around the table, you actually can create something different, a different outcome. If you're faced with the same problem and you've got the same background and the same thinking, you'll normally try and solve the problem the same way. The founding of Sun was four founders. You had Vinod Khosla, who was an engineer, had studied at Stanford, had come over to Stanford from India to do his PhD, a master's and PhD, and actually then caught up with the other three, one of which was Andy Bechtolsheim, who was at Carnegie Mellon doing a PhD. And then Scott McNealy, who was not doing his PhD, who actually wasn't an engineer, was more of a sales and marketing and business person. And then they went and recruited Bill Joy, who was actually at Berkeley, who was a software guy, never had done anything on the hardware side at all. And the four of them got together and actually created Sun on the Stanford campus. And essentially the four together actually fulfill different parts of the spectrum. Very different personalities, very different backgrounds, very different ways of thinking. You know, some of them introvert, some of them more extrovert, some of them you can't get a word in edgeways depending on what's going on, but they all had a common purpose, which was actually to build a network, one of the first networks that actually was better than anything else that was out there. That's to me a great example of how completely different backgrounds getting together to actually produce something phenomenal. You know, in some respects the dot-com era wouldn't have happened without some of the inventions that they actually created over the years. And obviously it wasn't just the four of them, then they recruited people. And one of the things that McNealy always said is to recruit better than you. You know, the first thing you have to do is build a management team or a team of people that are actually smarter than you are, so that you can actually continue that wave of innovative thinking and that type of thing. That's one of the earliest examples where I really sort of thought, wow, this is how that all happened.
So that innovative thinking, the modern way we sort of talk about disruption, if you're in an industry and kind of used to doing things a certain way, you tend to think that way. So disruption tends to take that sort of shock from the outside.
So it is thinking about a problem in a fundamentally different way. I mean, I think that's the definition of innovation, that you actually don't think about necessarily how it was done before, but you approach it from a quite different way of thinking.
And from a customer perspective, again, you've got customers with vastly different needs,
Absolutely.
wants.
I think that voice of the customer is very important in the innovation cycle. Not necessarily to say, okay, we're going to produce what the customer wants all the time, because sometimes in an innovative world, actually the customer hasn't even thought of what it is that they really want. And so to understand the business of the customer, to actually see what their pain points are or the problems that they're trying to solve, and then produce products and services that actually answer that as a problem statement, if you like. And again, all the engineering companies that I've been with over the years, including Telstra, actually do that, take the voice of the customer and put it into that innovation cycle. So for example, at Juniper, the very reason why Juniper was around and thrived was they fundamentally changed the way routing was done in terms of networks. And why did they do that? Because the internet wasn't scaling. The actual internet was not scaling at that point. Various companies had talked to the universities in the valley to see what ideas people had to actually change the way routing was done. And what Pradeep and the team did at the time was they really separated the control plane from the forwarding plane, and actually but that wasn't traditionally how routing was done. You had to have it all together. So to me, that's another example of where a different way of thinking, why can't we turn this on its head or separate it or move it in a different way, where you had software where the routing tables were stored, that type of thing, as opposed to having to carry it inside the same configuration.
And if you think about sort of software-defined networking and network function virtualization, we're going through exactly the same thing in a way, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's applying some of the fundamental principles that have happened in the compute space to the networking problem. Because at the end of the day, network elements are computers. And so the fact that it hasn't happened before isn't because it can't, it's just because no one's really thought about how to do it before. So I'm actually very excited about this new wave because I think, one, it's going to dramatically reduce the cost per bit of traffic as we move forward. Sorry if I'm getting too technical, but for me that's really exciting. I mean, half the industries today would not be around without what's happened from a networking perspective. I mean, Facebook wouldn't exist because it would be very, very slow if you had to do a dial-up to actually log in to check your status of your friends every day, right? That would not have happened if those innovations hadn't happened. Or in this next wave where the sharing economy is really taking off, you can only do that with the technology to enable the connection of those individuals or that marketplace or that type of thing. So to me, there's a huge amount out there that can happen as a flow-on effect of some of the technologies that we're working on and the industry's working on.